Hi guys, welcome to another and probably the last IoT Developer Event. There will be a successor of the IoT Developer Event, and so far I can tell you, but this will be the last time we will do such an event in this format and call it IoT Developer Event. This one I can already spoiler. Today I have again Ruben with me. This is also a follow-up event of one of the last events we had. If you can remember, and if you joined in one of the last events, Ruben presented an update on the go-c8y-cli tool, which is an amazing tool. In this call, we will focus on especially the extensions. So we do not do any introduction to the go-cli tool, so you should know what actually about it. So we will definitely just focus on what are extensions, how to use it, how to develop extensions, and so on. As always, please mute your microphones. If you have any questions, use the chat. Also, this time we allow that you can raise questions during Ruben is presenting. The video or the recording will be uploaded later on to YouTube. Again, I will share the tech community article about the recording and the YouTube link later on via email. That's everything from my side. Ruben, you can start.
Cool, thanks. Let me share. And just confirm when you can see.
You can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so today I wanted to have a look at a newish feature of go-c8y-cli. So looking at extensions. This was actually pushed a few months ago, or probably almost 6 months ago. However, you may not have already seen it. Good if you have. And I guess if you're a thin-edge user delving into firmware management, then you may have actually already used it without knowing. So I wanted to give a bit of rundown what extensions are, who is it good for, how to actually do it, how does it look like, how do you install it, etc. To give you a bit of a feel. I won't go through all of the details because we only have, let's say, 45 minutes and then 15 minutes for questions. So we can also delve into, questions via discussions and whatever. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a kind of a teaser of what extensions are. Just so I can direct you to, look at the documentation online. So first of all, what are extensions and who are they for? So extensions are really for anyone that uses go-c8y-cli already. So whether, you're developing like local microservices, UIs, working in a customer project, and you have like custom data models and you want to kind of view the data related to this project. Where you're doing like platform maintainers, whether it's kind of DevOps, and then looking around the customers kind of tenant or something like that, or if you're doing like a lot of proof of concepts, so pre-sales or something. So all of these you can kind of use extensions to better do the tasks that you want to do and also share them. So what is an extension? So an extension in the end is just a folder. So the folder has then different kind of files in there that says either has aliases, commands, views, or templates, and it tells the CLI how to then present that to the customer or like to the user. So in the end, because it's just a folder, you can actually then install extensions or like package the extensions via a Git repository. So this is the preferred kind of packaging. However, you don't need to do this. You can, if you just want to manage the folders locally, you can of course do that locally. But using a kind of like a Git repository is very handy to kind of actually, share it with them within your team, or even just for your own kind of use that you can actually have like full commit history if you do like changes along the way. So if we want to look at a bit of the online documentation, so if you go onto on the go-c8y-cli documentation website, if you go onto the concepts and look at the extensions, it goes through all of the detailed information, what is an extension and the components to it. So let's have a quick look at what makes up an extension. So the extension is just a folder, as I said before, and then it has like primary components within that folder. All of these are optional, so you don't need to, so an extension doesn't need to implement all of them. You can also just implement subsets for whatever purpose that you have. But you have basically available that you can create aliases. So these are like shortcut commands to make, I don't know, other commands a little bit more accessible. We have then two styles of commands that we have an API-based command, which is more kind of similar to, let's say, an Open API spec that you have like an endpoint or REST endpoint that you want to kind of execute. And then you have a way that you can basically create a command via that endpoint. So you can have access that API. Then we have commands, which are more like script-based commands, where you can write a bash script or something, which then does some kind of, sequence of commands or whatever. And then we have the templates and views. So the templates are these JSON templates, which are used everywhere by the template flag. And the same thing with the views. You can actually detail what kind of views should be used when to then show the stuff that you're interested in. So enough of documentation. Let's go to the actual command line and have a look at that in action. So I'm currently in a session. So you can actually manage extensions via the command line. So I can actually see what extensions I have already installed. I can see here I have a few, including the thin edge extension. And today I've kind of prepared a demo extension to kind of showcase some of the useful features. So with the same command, like with the extensions, you can also, create a new extension, remove, and do the normal management, install, or even update. So in the case of updating, that basically just does under the hood like a git fetch and just make sure that your clone repository is then up to date with the current whatever branch you're on. So default being main. So how do you actually then, let's, for this example, let's look at the extension that I created today. So you'll see here that I have a extension called demo. So it doesn't have a repository associated to it because it's actually a local folder that I just created as part of this repository go-c8y demo. So inside this, there's multiple folders, which then say, what components am I using for this extension? And I've actually then utilized all of the components here. So I'll give you a bit of a kind of demo of all the functionality available. So probably to start off, looking at a specific command, or actually to use it. So let's just have a poke around here. So since the plugin or extension is called demo, you access everything that is provided by the demo via the syntax, so go-c8y first, and then the name of the extension. If your extension starts with go-c8y dash, then that is left out because that would read a little bit strange if you had go-c8y dash demo. So that's automatically stripped from the prefix of the extension. So once we're in here, we can then do tab completion, then to see, what commands does this extension offer. So we have a bit of a mix here that we have like devices, lab, microservices, software, services. So you're free to define this however you want. So if you want to kind of create a highly nested structure, by all means, you can do that. However, you always just have to think of usability in the end, that you don't want to provide something that's really too nested because that might be a little bit more complicated then for users to use. But it's up to you to kind of split it how you want. So maybe just a good example which shows a API-based command is looking at the microservices command. So here, what I did just then was just tab, because generally, you don't know how something's implemented, just tab, and generally there's tab completion then available. So in this custom command that I've created, so it has like so the group is microservices because I want to kind of manage microservices and might have multiple commands to this. And here I just have a new command called health, which is meant to get, print out the health of the microservices. I've given it an ID just so it feels like all of the other kind of Go commands. And then as you can see here, when I tap complete, in the definition of this command, I've said that the ID is actually, yes, it's an ID, but I actually want then microservice tab completion. So then I get this, familiar kind of tab completion, which is available to all the other kind of like native commands. And then I can actually see the health endpoint by just piping it to JQ so I can get a JSON representation of it. So let's have a look how this actually was defined. So let me go here. So since we're talking about this command, what it's doing in the background, so let me do that. Let's just use dry here. And again, you'll see that there's rich tab completion. So here we're using the endpoint service, then using the microservice name, and then just the health endpoint. So not all microservices would implement this, or I don't know whether it's a must. Technically, you could use a different kind of endpoint, but it assumes that the health endpoint is then implemented by the microservices. So this command is just basically one-to-one mapping to the health endpoint. So this is where having like a API defined command is really useful, because you just need to then define that here we have, I want this kind of the health command, which is listed here, then grouped under a subcommand called microservices. And that's what's then providing this kind of setup. So you have extension, the group name here, and then the command here. So a group can have multiple commands. So I could then, even do health 2. There. And then magically, when I type complete, I actually have 2 commands come up here. And if I did second command, so it has a different name, then I can see I get my tab completion. So this is all happens, or go-c8y-cli interprets this at runtime. So this means that I didn't need to recompile anything. I could actually work from locally, if I'm just kind of developing this. So you can make on-the-fly changes. You'll just need to, do the tab completion again or run the command again, and then everything should work. Get rid of that. Then part of the definition, so I've given the command a name, and then it's very similar to the Open API spec, but I kind of custom roll your own, because originally I created this prior to the Open API spec being freely used by Cumulocity. So you can kind of, it feels very kind of similar to that. So, you define a method, the path, whatever kind of collection property, and then some path parameters. So here in the path, we actually want to use a variable here. So we can see that this ID, so the curly braces ID, then corresponds to this path parameter. And then you can give the path parameter, or like this ID, a type. And so all of this is, there's a JSON schema behind this to help you kind of find out, what types are available. So either you can use like strings or whatever, or you can give it a little bit more richer type. Like in this instance, we want microservice name, because that tells go-c8y-cli that it should then provide the microservice name completion in the background and do whatever kind of namespace resolution. And yeah, that's it for creating one command. So maybe just to highlight kind of different types. So if I were to use microservice, so the difference here is the microservice type would actually then resolve it to the microservice ID. So if I do the same thing here, and just pick one and then go dry, you'll see now that when the path gets resolved, it will actually then, convert that from the name, it'll do a named lookup, and then give you the ID back. So you're kind of in control how you want to manage that yourself. So all of the types which are then used within the native application are also available here. So there's many kind of rich types, and if you don't have any kind of lookups, you can just use, your straight kind of string type or integer or whatever. So it should be fairly easy to use, but it's best just looking at a few examples and then trying out with dry just to see kind of how all of that resolves. But then going to a bit more complex example. So that was a quite easy one where it just looks at doing a straight endpoint and there's no kind of like fancy query building there or anything. So another use case is, for example, the advanced software management microservice. So this is a fairly new microservice, which is, I think, introduced in 10.18, correct me if I'm wrong, or at some time in the last few years, which is meant to abstract the interaction of software management on devices. So provide some new API endpoints that you can then use to get, the software list, you can add items, you can remove items or whatever. So using this, or like with the new kind of API endpoint, you can actually then create a custom set of commands which then uses those endpoints. So here, for example, we have a list command, we have a set, we have an add, so it kind of utilizes all of these points. So I'm just going to focus on the list one, but then you can extrapolate to all the other kind of commands. It'll just show a few kind of interesting points. So part of the spec, you can also define not only, like the path, you can define the accepts, content type, etc. You can also provide like the examples so that when someone's actually using your command, so here, software, let's go list, help, we'll get this full examples, which looks like all of the other commands for the native commands, but it's kind of built in there. So you can define like if there's some kind of common examples which are useful for users, then it kind of helps, to direct how the users can use it in different scenarios. So you can make it as complicated or as simple as you need to. So you can also do like piping examples like here. So the idea is to make it as useful as possible. So like common use cases are always good here. Then we actually build, so this API supports then query parameters. So exactly like the path kind of parameters, we have a defined key called query parameters, where then I can define each of the different names of the flags, which will then be converted to the actual query parameters. So in this example, if we go demo, software list, and if I just tab through it, so I can see I have device. I've defined it to be the special device type. And so this means when I tab, I'll get tab completion here. So that's, again, like the microservice name, that's the only thing you kind of need to define, and you give it a description. And if we just do a dry on that again, you can see that the flag was called device, but that was actually mapped in the outgoing query to device ID. So this is similar kind of method because generally you want to kind of abstract, or sometimes it makes sense to abstract the user interface to something to the actual outgoing command. So you can add a kind of like compatibility layer on the top, or just like a usability layer. So I've used device because this is exactly like, if we're just doing operations list, we have device here. So I just wanted to have a very consistent user experience in my extension. So I used the same convention used in the native commands. And like that, so if you have like let's say an iterator parameter. So you basically want to say, if I have piped input or pipeline stuff, I want that automatically mapped to the device flag. So that means you can do wonderful things like devices list, pipe, and I can pipe it here. And if I just do dry there, we can see that I've piped the input list of devices, piped it to the software list command, and it sent out multiple queries, or it would have. So if you don't have that there, then your command won't actually, it will still send it, but it won't really be mapped to any data. So it's kind of like this internal iterator kind of concept, which all of the inbuilt commands already have, but it gives you kind of like an extension point to say, yes, I want then standard input then mapped to whatever kind of query parameters. So with this level of kind of flexibility, you can do a lot of kind of really nice things. Yeah, and then here just define like name and version, because these are all supported by the microservice. Now, in instances where you might not find a good fit for your type. So for example, here I've defined a flag called type, which is, since I haven't used a property name, the property name will just be, type will be the property name. So for example, demo software list, let's just choose a device and do, type ABC. So here we can see that the type flag has been then routed, like mapped to the type query parameter. And it hasn't really done anything with it. Just goes, hey, here's the data put across. Now you might want to then actually create a richer experience to the user. We're going, well, maybe you want to kind of set up to only allow specific types, or even better, get the list of types from the platform, which is currently not a defined type. So you can actually define your own completion command. So for example, completion, so you can look at the tab where you can get a bit of a description, go, okay, you can command to be executed when the user tries to tab complete. And you can also reference whatever kind of input value with the current value that you have there. So what am I doing in this completion command is I'm actually just using another go-c8y-cli command to then do an inventory search. And here I'm actually not even using the input because maybe I don't really care about the input. I'm just doing a listing of all of the inventory managed objects, which has a specific type. So the software type, the fragment, or that fragment, and then also has the type value, and then just choosing the software type because I only want to return the string of the type, and that's it. And yeah, that's it. So how does that actually look? Tap tab, and then magically I get these values. So these values are actually looked up dynamically from the platform and then provided. So if I were to add a new type, then a new type would be then added to the list. And so it means you can create a very rich kind of interface. And because if you know all of the other kind of, C8y commands, then it's very easy to kind of customize on the fly. So I think maybe actually, no, that should do. So you can actually apply this to anything, which is really convenient. And so if there isn't a specific type, you can always, revert back to the string type and then just do whatever kind of custom tab completion you want. So obviously to do this tab completion, it needs to call the process in the background. So you'll actually spawn a new process to do this. However, it's a very flexible mechanism. So this is just it's an array. So every argument is just then separated. So instead of defining this as a string with white space separation, it just defines like this, like similar what Docker does, similar concept. So then moving on to some other kind of style commands. So with the API commands, you mostly had, you execute one command and that will be then translated to one API call. Now, there's some instances where you might want to do a bit more than that, than just one API call. Yes, you can still do the piping, so you can kind of connect it nicely with, multiple devices. But let's say that you actually wanted to do something a little bit richer, and maybe if you're doing like a POC for customers. So I've created a subcommand called lab, and that has multiple commands. So these are script-based commands. So if we just look at this one, these are just scripts which are then stored in a nested folder hierarchy, where the folder hierarchy then dictates where these commands are then presented to the user. So if we look at the command console again, we go go-c8y demo. I had the commands, or like the lab command or lab folder. So here I have the lab. And then since I have 3 files here, so these are all shell commands or like shell files, I get tab completion to show what's kind of available to use. So for the list command, the list is really just a simple one where I use a bash shebang, specify that it should stop on unexpected errors, which is kind of convention in a lot of shell languages. And here I'm just doing a custom c8y devices list command and just saying, well, maybe for the lab, I just want to show lab devices. And I'm also using a custom view where I define what data do I actually want to look at. So let's run this. And we see I don't have anything there. Okay, so let's look at some of the other commands. We have a prepare command. So the prepare command is a little bit longer, but still fairly trivial. And I've created a nice help text where I've defined, described the command, what the command does, and then followed normal kind of practices where I've given it a usage. Because this is the command which is executed by the go-c8y-cli, so you kind of need to do all of the help commands yourself. So you need to do the flag parsing yourself or pass them on to whatever underlying commands you're using. So it's always good to have like full documentation, because if something's not documented, it's really, really hard for the users to use. So you always need a good description, what arguments does that support, and examples, etc. So just looking at these examples, and I could have just done this. I can, oops, I've got a mistake there. That's okay. So looking at this, I want to prepare my lab then with 10 devices. So let's just do that quickly. And I've just created 10 devices. So I don't need to know anything how, what I've done to do this, because maybe in your context, you always want to define that, all of your lab devices are called this, they have a type lab, etc. So everything's kind of predefined, so you can kind of have sensible defaults. You can customize that however you want. And then in the end, it's just using 2 commands. So it's using the c8y-util repeat to do your kind of initial iteration of how many devices you want to create. And then using a inbuilt JSONet template, which is included within the actual extension, it then creates these kind of rich devices for me, where it includes like custom fragments. It tries to do a bit of kind of dynamic logic by, choosing a random OS value, using, choosing one of the Mac OS, Windows, Linux, etc. So you can extend that to however you want, basically. And it will also do a random list of c8y software lists, items. So now if I do the demo list again, you'll notice that this is actually a different view than before. So because in the list command, I've actually explicitly said what default view do I want to have. So it's automatically then said, okay, I have a custom view defined where I actually want to know what is the OS value. So here I can then see from my lab devices, just do 100. So I can see all of the lab devices which are created. Then I can see kind of, what's out there, and it's really at the forefront. So users can have a quick overview for the information which means something to them. So looking at, maybe an example for that view that was created. So like the other components, the views are then defined under the views folder. And so here, just look at the list command. So in the list command, I've defined that you can reference these additional artifacts which are provided by the extension via the extension name : And you'll get tab completion for all of this. But here I've just basically, given the default view and just said, hey, this is the name. So this is the custom device view defined. So the view is then responsible for showing what fragments are then should be included by default. When is this view activated? So in my case, I'm manually activating this, so I don't need to really worry about, how to manually trigger this kind of view. I can just set it by default. So you can have a kind of nice level of control that you can set as sensible default, but then users can also switch it off if they don't want it. So maybe, and like all of like the other commands, like the API and the script-based commands, you can actually then customize the views by just editing the file. So if I didn't want to see the creation time, because you're going, well, that's a little bit too much noise for me, and maybe like the type doesn't make sense because this is just repeating type, like lab multiple times, and well, maybe that doesn't make sense. So I've run the command again, then my view has updated because I'm saying, hey, use the custom device view, and then picks and chooses these folder or these column names by default. So you can use, like, that's really useful in projects because you can really focus on the data which is interesting to you. This is not a new concept. This has been there since V2, the initial release of go-c8y-cli. However, the extensions makes all of these features a little bit more packageable and shareable within a team. So it makes it a little bit more easy, or like easier to kind of share with different people within the team, etc. And with all of this stuff, so there are JSON schemas available. So if you want to kind of know, hey, what view definitions are available, you can do different kind of matching definitions or criteria to say, when is this view activated? Or just manually say, what command should use what view. And like with all of these, so with the views, you don't have to use them in the commands. You can also just provide them as a user, like opt-in kind of experience. So for example, if I was just doing like a devices list, and I kind of want to apply my, like this view, the custom device view, from just the inbuilt command, then I can use the same kind of global variables available. And if I know the name, which I do, so demo, I can tab complete through the, the demo, so the extension name, : and then I can see, okay, there's a custom device view. I want to use that. And then you get the kind of value because these, so let me just do that, and then you can see some data. So you can also, let the user opt in if they want to use this. So you don't really need to force users to use it. So it can be just kind of like a view which is used on demand, basically. Same thing, like the same principle goes for templates. So with the prepare command, I was using a JSON template called device.jsonit, and again using the demo : syntax. But I can also refer to this template just using other commands. So if I just wanted to do, I don't know, devices create, name, test, hello, template, demo, tap. I can then use it in your inbuilt commands. So this is really flexible because you can kind of provide all these kind of extra artifacts to users, and then the user still gets to control how they use that in some instances. So you can still allow power users to, if they're not happy with that prepare command, they still have like reusable kind of building blocks that they can use in their own custom commands. So you're kind of making your extension a little bit more usable, more versatile. So you can apply that to whatever you want. And with all these kind of setups, it makes it very easy to then actually get a usable demo very, very quickly, because maybe in the pre-sales group, you could do a custom, hey, device management showcase where you could create, 100 devices quickly, and then all you really need to do, or like if you want to kind of show how does the software type look in the UI, that's actually quite easy. We'll go lists, and I'm just going to pick the first device, and I'm going to open it up in my web browser. So I can pipe it to all the inbuilt commands, which already exist, and then I can have a look in the software list going, okay, that's how the software type information is then presented in the UI. So it makes it very easy and quick to kind of do these demos, and because I'm sure everyone else is doing these kind of very similar demos, then you can then package it as an extension and then just say, hey, install it via this kind of one-liner, and that's it. Let's go back to the README. So how do you discover plugins? And we might then also have a look at a few kind of existing plugins. So if you've hosted it, or if you host it on GitHub, you can mark your extension with the go-c8y-cli extension topic. So for example, some stuff that was added this morning is the OOE application that provides an extension where you can then, interact with the OOE endpoints and do things you need to do there. So that's then, if you add this topic to your GitHub extension, and it's a public repository, obviously, then you'll come up in this list. So you can kind of have peruse what's available. And the default kind of README, which is generated from the extensions, generally has the same kind of, it tries to be descriptive about what is included in the extension. So it tries to kind of, it's not a hard enforced kind of control. It's more of a gentleman's agreement where we have then going, okay, this one doesn't include aliases, but it includes commands, templates, views. So the user kind of knows what it includes before they install it. And having a one-liner to show how to install it is generally helpful. So you can see how, just because it's hosted on GitHub, you don't need that github.com kind of prefix. It just assumes that it's on GitHub. However, you can also install it from any kind of Git repository by just putting the full Git URL in there. And that's all it takes to kind of install a extension. So you can also control how to install, or like where it's installed. So you can check out the documentation for there. And then, but like before installing any kind of plugins, because these are scripts that could be executed, just the general kind of, you should explore the extension before you install it, kind of a no-brainer. So have a look, just make sure it's not doing anything weird or unexpected. So just remember these are scripts executed, and if you're not the person writing it, read it. Otherwise, do not install it. Or if you just, but you don't have to share your extensions. You can just have your own private collection if you're really security focused and don't trust anyone else, then that's also fine. So you can have a bit of poke around what's in there. And so you can really do anything with it. So I think for this example, it prints out your license associated to it. So it's doing a little bit more complicated actions. So it's doing some more bash interactions to really get the information about the license. So you can kind of bridge the worlds between the Cumulocity world and then, I don't know, use it to generate local certificates and then upload those certificates or whatever. So you can really create a nice user experience by kind of, it's not just an API endpoint, because that in itself is not super usable. You're kind of adding a new interface to that API endpoint. So some of the other extensions, so another one that was created is an extension to do like build pipeline stuff. So I believe it is doing a microservice deployment. A bit of like convenience wrapper around some of the existing ones. You can kind of do, additional subscribe or conditional subscriptions and stuff like that. To some of the extensions that I've created. So for ThinEdge, so that doesn't actually do too many Cumulocity operations apart from uploading a CA certificate. However, it's kind of like this nice convenience because it's packaged, and you can upload the certificate to Cumulocity and then do onboarding. It does the onboarding via SSH. So you can really bridge. It's up to you to what you actually bring within that kind of extension. And you can also have fewer extensions, which are just views. So this will be replacing the default views, which are currently delivered by when you install go-c8y-cli, because I want to make these views that they're optional. So maybe you don't like the defaults that I've chosen. So it would just be, uninstall the extension and then you can build your own, or you can fork these views and do it yourself. So they don't really have to include any kind of commands or anything. But here there's aliases and views. So I can do a nice alias, which is just doing mo, so manage object, where it does a inventory gets and does a pretty printed version of that. Yeah. So it's really up to you how you want to use these, how you can share them. And as I said, the extension, so the contents page is good to get more of a context on what extensions are. And then we also have a tutorial where it steps you through each of these kind of steps. So it does it also like step by step and, eventually makes it more useful and more useful. So, starting by, so it's looking at the API command by doing like a command group, and then goes into details like tab completion, how to do external ones, and even do, using the %s kind of temp placeholder, and also doing, I think, named lookups. So same kind of thing. If you want to do kind of like a ID resolution by name, so lookup by name kind of stuff, you can also then define that exactly like you do completion, but you have another kind of layer on top where you return the ID. So I think I did one last example just showing the aliases, because that's quite convenient for personal use. So I just look at the extensions. So a good example, so if I want to get the device type statistics, where I just want to sample maybe, the first 2,000 devices in the tenant, and then just get a unique list of how many different types are out there. Obviously, this is only doing a sample. So it'll only be getting the first 2,000. Obviously, you don't really want to be running this on a 500,000 device fleet, because you need to fetch all of them and then do this local kind of stuff. But for some tenants, this can be just a quick, just give me a kind of smattering of what's available. And all I can do is that. And then I can see in my tenant, I have most of those lab devices, some thin edge devices, OPC UA, etc. And all this command is doing is using, sort and unique C. So doing a unique and then getting the count of each of the unique items, and then also sorting the output to present it in, the most is at the top. And let me just clean up my lab devices, lab, clean up. And now my lab devices are all gone. Perfect. Okay, any questions?
Harald raised a question at the beginning, but I think you already answered that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think at the moment, I think there was another extension regarding the OPC UA endpoints, if I remember correctly. I think it was done, Alexander Pester was looking at it at the IUG hackathon last year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that made it past kind of like the proof of concept. But it's quite flexible. It might be a little bit daunting at first, but if you're like me, if you look at some of the examples, that usually clarifies a lot of things. And working through the tutorial is a good kind of, because it gets progressively more complex in terms of like the more interesting features. So it starts off easy and then kind of gets a little bit more interesting. So that can be kind of good to learn that.
So did I understand it correctly that the microservice command was also, at least originally, an extension, or was it directly built in?
No, the C8y microservices, that was, I think they're fairly early on. So that was an abstraction because, you generally want to know if you're interacting with microservices or not. But that raises a good point. So if you create an API for maybe a new Cumulocity feature, like that software, advanced software management, it can start out its life as an extension. And then, so this is kind of a good proving ground, because if people say, oh, this is really useful, then you can actually create a ticket in the repository with the extension or link to the extension or whatever, and it'll actually be a quite easy job to convert that to native commands, because it uses, let's say, about 95% of the same syntax that are used to do the code generation part. So it'll be a good feed in. There might be a few usability questions still. So that's basically why the advanced software management is not yet inbuilt to native, because the API is slightly different to some of the other Cumulocity APIs. So I have a few disagreements there, at least from a user experience point of view. But yeah, it's good. So if you have or if you see like a common function, by all means create an extension and then play around with it to prove, that the usefulness of it, and then you can create a ticket, and then we can look at adding that into the inbuilt native product.
Okay, thank you.
But the API commands feel very much like a native, so it doesn't really feel too much like it's actually doing this on the fly. It's actually surprisingly quick. So yeah, even if it stays an extension, it's usually not too bad. Maybe if there's no question, a few notes on, if you're doing command, API command versus script-based command. So I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in the docs, but an API-based command is, I would say, better if you can do it, if there's a one-to-one mapping to an API. because that has the advantage is because it has a rich kind of definition. It gives me it gives the CLI tool all the meta information it needs to properly present that to the user. So you get nice tab completion, very rich tab completion. You get examples all out of the box. Whereas if it's a script-based command, yes, you can do a lot more in the script-based command because you can do anything. However, the script-based doesn't have a nice meta model that tells the CLI command what can I tab complete and whatever. So there's a missing meta description, and I didn't want to create another YAML just for the tab completion for the script-based model, because then you might have a mismatch in between the two. Going, well, if you update the YAML file regarding descriptor to the script-based, then I don't know whether you actually really parse that in the script-based thing or not. So the user experience is not as good in my opinion. It's okay if you're doing, a command without any arguments, or maybe one forced argument, like positional argument. That might be still a pretty good user experience, but not this. You have 20 different flags, because if you're not getting tab completion for flags, that is a real pain, and it's not very user friendly. Yeah, so just keep that in mind. But obviously, it's really nice because you can do, like the TED onboarding and stuff like that, do SSH commands and everything with a still very user-focused or user-orientated extension.
Maybe I have a question, Ruben. You showed that you can install extensions and you go in directly to GitHub, or you can use the GitHub repository URL. Now you have introduced the topic. Do you have any plans that you also can list all the available extensions directly from the command line? It could be a next step, right?
Yes. I think the only caveat would be because it's using the GitHub API, then it would be rate limited to if you don't have authentication. And so if people run into that authentication limit, then user experience gets pretty terrible. But yeah, I think it's definitely something to look into if it's a list or something, or whether you could just have the list of commands is, generated by an internal bit or something. There's a JSON-based list, which is also updated or something like that.
You can actually make it part of the project, do an extract of the GitHub available extensions, and then provide it as part of the go-c8y, or maybe.
Yeah.
And just had an idea that maybe you can also list them directly in the tool.
Yeah. No, I think that would be the natural progression for sure.
Ruben, this is Thomas. So maybe just one or two comments from our side is we've been using the extensions already, and you've shown the OEE extension, and maybe just for everyone why we actually got to use the extensions and why we're really happy and thankful that Ruben made this feature available. So there have been different reasons. So first reason is we had to come up with quite complex cloud ops guides for OEE because of installing licenses, and that's what you've shown. So this was very error prone. So we always had problems when cloud ops, for example, needed to update licenses for OEE, which in fact are Parma licenses, and where to store and how to format and all this kind of stuff. So we basically built this kind of automation and just added the go-c8y-cli into the cloud ops guide basically, and helping everyone saving time. So this was one use case. And the second then was basically to use for GitHub automation. So we started building GitHub actions, so custom GitHub actions, but this ended up also in a lot of actions we built. And so we came to the conclusion that we need some sort of a CLI. Then we started building our own CLI, and this also proved to be very complex. So building this go-c8y CLI extensions was very, very easy for us and helped us building this kind of automation in very short time. So basically, we only have our extensions, and then in the GitHub workflows, we just do the go-c8y-cli calls just as Ruben's shown. So this makes it very easy to maintain an extension, for example, for build pipeline or anything else, and then just have your commands and build your automation very easily. Actually, we wanted to do some knowledge exchange session on this, but we never got to this. But this might be maybe also a follow-up to the session that you've been doing right now. So how to actually help, how extensions can help also with GitHub Actions and GitHub automation workflows, etc., and make your life easier. Yeah,
thanks.
Just some thoughts from my side.
Yeah,
but thanks for providing this great feature. So it has helped us a lot, really.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, like the idea behind, so with the extensions, the idea is not to replace, there will still be times where writing your own binary makes more sense. Don't get me wrong. So it's not meant to try to shoe in every kind of thing within the extension. However, it just means that you have a very convenient abstraction point that you can do all of the nice, iterated, multi-worker progress bar and all of that stuff that you don't need to do that yourself. So you can still have a really nice, rich interface. You don't need to worry about authentication because that's all done for you. So it's very convenient. So you really have to just concentrate on your small kind of business logic, and that's it. So it also could be paired with other things like, the Python Cumulocity API package and stuff like that. You could do calling that from a Python script. So the script-based stuff doesn't need to be shell. It could also be Python or anything you want. Yeah, so it really depends on the extension point. But obviously, if you're writing like a microservice, then stick with writing microservice. Don't go down the extension route. But for the future, I have plans to support also binary extensions. So not a script or like a file-based thing that's really a binary. So pre-compiled things where you might even be able to, like, for example, write it in Go, the language that, go-c8y-cli is written in. So you can reuse some of the libraries that I have built in. However, I still need to work out the extension points and what makes sense, what doesn't make sense to make that available. But sometime when I have some free time on my hands, I'll look into that. But yeah, if there's any also missing features or you stumble across anything, feel free to create tickets or in the discussion on the GitHub page, or reach out to me directly if you want. But usually prefer like public forums if possible, because it gives a chance more people to kind of interact there. But hopefully I've convinced you to at least have Go, write your own, could just be your own kind of script kiddie. That's also fine. I have a few kind of going, which is useful just for my daily kind of activities. But hopefully it's shown to be useful enough for everyone. Cool.
Thank you, Ruben. If there are no other questions, then I think we can close the session. Thanks again. Have a nice day, guys.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.